So if you don't know, I'm Dawn Taloyo with the Pacific Northwest Conference staff team here, and working in concert with my colleague Erik to put on this webinar today, and always doing our best to figure out how to kind of resource you all and kind of hopefully help be at least in step, if not a step ahead of maybe some of the questions and things that you are asking or wondering about. And we recently did a clergy check-in kind of survey about over kind of the end of May, early June. And one of the items that kept coming up is around technology and kind of figuring out what now. I know we had that initial flurry of everyone going online and the learning curve was huge. But now there's questions about what happens as churches kind of begin to regather, and do we continue to do the technology and the live stream or the recording and whatnot. And Erik's been really educating himself on this. He can share about that, and we will do our best to, or he will do his best to kind of answer any questions or help maybe stir or spur some thoughts around this topic. So because there are quite a few people on and still coming on, we would just ask that you maybe utilize the chat if you have specific questions, and I'll do my best to kind of monitor that and either interrupt Erik or maybe at the end, kind of go through and mention him some of those questions. So with that, Erik, why don't you just go ahead?
Great. Thank you, Dawn, for the introduction. Thank you for being here, everybody. I think this is an important topic that there are a lot of different questions on. It could go a lot of different directions. And so I hope today is helpful, but I also hope that today is just the beginning of your own processing of this and your journey as a church, figuring out how to have fruitful online ministry for the long haul, but also maybe the beginning of your conversation or dialogue with me, because I would love to come alongside anybody in any churches as they try to figure this out, whether they have technical questions or strategy questions or purpose questions, whatever it might be. So I have slides that I am going to be sharing with you, and I've also put them all onto a Google Doc, and I just pasted into the chat box a link to the Google Doc where you can find all the same information that's in the slides if you'd rather follow along that way. So at this point, I'm going to share my screen so you can see the slides that I so meticulously prepared for today. Let's see here, share screen. There it is. Can you see that? Fruitful online ministry for the long haul.
Yes.
Let me introduce myself a little bit. My name is Erik Cave, and I work for the Pacific Northwest Conference as the Director of Next Gen Ministries. In that role, I get to serve leaders in churches who are working with kids, youth, and young adults. I'm also the coordinator for communications, and so in that role, I do our newsletter, all of our online social media, as well as our blog and all that kind of stuff. And through that, I have, close connection to what's going on with technology, and it's always been a passion of mine as well. And so that's kind of what led me to kind of be here. I don't really come as an expert, but maybe just somebody who's read a lot and they could be glad to pass on what they've shared. You can see there, I put a picture of my family. This is just from last week doing one of our favorite things, which is paddleboarding together. I'm sorry, this picture is a little scandalous because I'm not wearing a shirt, but I know that most of you aren't wearing any pants right now either, so we'll just call it even, all right? What we're gonna do for this, I'm gonna give you a quick overview what we wanna do today for our time together. Kind of a subtitle might be Rethinking the Need for Digital Ministry. And so in that, what I think we need to do to start is to understand and realize that we're going through a significant time of change, and that oftentimes needs to come with it a kind of a point of grieving, because we're going to let go. There's no more normal. I don't think going to be any going back to the way things were before, exactly the way they were before. Digital today is not an option. It is a requirement, I believe, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Where once stability and safety may have been the primary focus of your church's ministry, you're going to need to move towards innovation and risk a little bit more. And those are all very hard things. Change is always difficult. It's scary and it's painful. And it's okay to take time to grieve it. And so that's one of the things we're going to do today. As we talk about this, we're going to do some good thinking about online ministry. It'd be tempting to look at this webinar and simply say, okay, how do I get my church to do a live stream service while also doing a live service? How do we stream our live service? We're going to talk about that for sure. But I want us to go deeper than just that practical element and really think about what online ministry is about, what it could be. So we're going to start there. Then we're going to move on and talk about good practices for online ministry. So out of that, we will be able to talk about some of those details. What's some of the equipment? What are some of the considerations for actually getting a live service online? And then I have a bunch of resources that I'm going to share, links and webinars and all kinds of stuff that will hopefully be helpful to you. And assuming we have time, we'll give you the opportunity to share resources that you've come across with each other. So when I titled this webinar, I did so very carefully: Fruitful Online Ministry for the Long Haul. And so online ministry, I could have said live streaming, but I in purpose said online ministry because I think we want to take time to think about ministry beyond just live streaming. Fruitful in that we want to really consider what is going to be successful, what is going to be useful and meaningful ministry for your church. How can online ministry actually enhance in-person ministry and vice versa? And then for the long haul, because we're looking at, this is going to we're going to be in this for a long time. Not only our quarantine, the stuff that's going on with quarantine right now, their phases are going to last probably longer than we expect. And so the current ministry that we're doing online will probably be lasting longer than we originally intended. Even after we move into a phase where we might be able to meet in larger groups, there will still be people that won't be able to meet because they either have health issues or maybe they're far away. And there'll still be people that won't want to because they want to wait until it is absolutely 100% safe. And even when we get to that point, even when in the long term, all restrictions about meeting have been lifted and we're in the final phase of coming out of quarantine, there will still be the need for online ministry because there will still be people that can't attend the service, whether they are stuck at home or whether they're still far away. And there will still be people that will choose not to come to in-person services because they have gotten so used to the online service that it's preferable to them. And so for that reason, it's important for us to be thinking about this for the long term, the long haul. Actually, I would consider think of it permanently. How are we going to permanently implement online ministry? And there's a website that I just popped up on the screen there. This is to a page on our conference website where we have listed a whole bunch of resources for COVID-19. They cover a lot of different things. One of those is for live streaming. And so earlier, months ago, we put together one that was simply about how to get a church service online. And that you can find that there. But within that page, I've updated it to include, it will eventually include a link to this webinar because we're recording it, but it also has a link to the document that I mentioned earlier that will hopefully be helpful for anybody that's trying to do these things. I've also pasted that document into the Google Doc. I didn't want to put it here because it's sort of like a really long URL and it would look bad on my PowerPoint. So, okay, let's get into good thinking about online ministry. And I think first what I'd like to do is just share a little bit about my journey, how I got to where I am today in my thinking about this. And so the first thing you need to know is that I started as not a big fan of social media. And I chose a picture on this slide on purpose of a person with a selfie stick because I think selfie sticks embody in a lot of ways a lot of the problems I have with social media, because social media can be very narcissistic. It's all about me. I have personally, because of that, drawn away from social media. I don't actually like sit and scroll through social media very much. I'm really not interested in seeing what meal people had that day or what they're thinking about the commercial that just came on television, or those kind of things, because the narcissistic part of social media is not appealing to me. And what I've seen in the past of churches as they engage in online ministry tends to be kind of along the model of like televangelism. And so it's not interactive. It's just something for someone to passively observe. And because of that, it hasn't necessarily had a big appeal to me. However, we went into our quarantine time, and churches started being very creative in figuring out how they're going to engage online ministry. And as they did so, I noticed a lot of fruitful online ministry. And I heard about churches who would report that their attendance numbers had gone up through their online ministry time. The giving had actually gone up. And there's an amazing story from Bremerton Covenant that shares a story about some Navy SEALs who were in Afghanistan, who connected with their service, participated in communion with them, and are now have continued to be a part of the community of that church while stationed in Afghanistan. It is an amazing story. And so those kind of stories have got my attention to realize, okay, wait a minute. There is actually a lot of value that can be had in effective online ministry. And then the last thing for myself that I noticed is as time has gone on, my attitude has changed about my own Sunday morning online ministry, online experience. And I've come to actually quite enjoy participating in services online. It gives me the opportunity to visit a lot of different churches, and as a conference staff person, that's really handy. Saves me a lot of gas and time travel. But it also gives me the chance I can visit 2 or 3 churches in one Sunday, which is a lot of fun. I love the fact that while I'm watching a service with my family, we can discuss what is being talked about. We just say out loud, oh, that's interesting, or oh, that makes me think of this. If we were to do that in a live church service in person, we would get shushed, by the ushers. And if we want to, even I can pause it. I can get up, go to the bathroom. That's a really handy thing about there's just a lot of advantages that I have come to the point where I've realized I think I prefer an online service right now. Now, for sure, like everyone, I miss meeting in person. I miss the dynamic of live worship and the connection with people. But part of me is, if I'm real with myself, likes the fact that I can roll out of bed at 10 o'clock, turn on the service, gather my family, and we can enjoy a time together that way. And I think my attitude is not different than others. So I'm going to talk about changing thoughts and digital habits related to church that I've seen in our culture at large. And I think that my own thinking is reflective of our larger culture. And that is to say, the way people think about church has changed. And I think that that's something that we as Christian leaders, that our churches need to come to grips with. Thinking about church has changed. People's thinking about how they connect with church, its place in their life, how they connect it through what medium has changed completely. Heidi Campbell is an author, and she wrote a book, and in it she talked about the idea that we have moved into a networked society. I'll reference the book in a little bit, so don't worry about that. And in that, she's referring to the fact that our society has become such that our community is no longer based on our geography. It used to be that your community was the people around you, and you connected with them because they were the people around you. When cars came along, it changed that a little bit, and now you can drive. You could have a little more choice, especially when it comes to church. You could drive and choose which church you were going to be a part of. But it was still a geographically centered location, maybe a larger geography. But today, with the onset of social networks, community has become something that I put together. I decide who to connect with. I decide how strong those connections will be. And this changes everything. It puts the person at the center. And so it changes that person's thinking. It changes their practice as far as how they work out their faith and what they do, to how they worship and such. And it changes the nature of authority, because the person is now the main authority, not a community leader and not the pastor of the church that they are participating with. It's up to the individual. And for good or bad, this is where people, a large number of people, if not the majority of people, are today. And you might want to push back on that. And I would encourage you to, because there's a lot of problems and potential issues with that, even with my own thinking that I shared earlier. But here's the thing is that I think we need to, as a church, as Christian leaders, engage this well so that we will be able to have a voice to be able to influence this in our soul culture, in our society. It's said that it takes 30 days to form a new habit. And we are now, according to my rough calculation, about 110 days into our quarantine time. And so habits have definitely been formed. People have formed new habits about how they're going to be connecting with church. And just because the governor gives us permission and we open our doors for people to come to church, they won't necessarily do so because they formed these new habits. So Heidi wrote this book called Networked Theology, and this is what she means by it. There's a picture of the book there if you'd like to take a look at it. At the end, I'll have a reference to how to get a hold of her and find the book if you'd like to. She says this: networked theology is a framework for personal and communal reflection based on understanding how digital culture functions and how this shapes how faith is practiced in a networked society. That's a lot. That's a big mouthful, but that's what I want to encourage us as leaders and as churches to move towards, having a networked theology where we are engaging our culture on this very important issue of online connections, especially the network society idea of it, so that we understand it. We are able to then be able to speak into it and be able to have answers for the questions that are coming up. And this is what I truly believe, that as the world moves towards a network society, it needs the church as a guide. Right now, our world, our culture is fast diving into this network society idea. And they have nobody guiding them, telling them how to do it in a healthy way, how to avoid pitfalls, how to do so in a way that will help them to thrive in life, especially in their spiritual lives, as opposed to just engaging in self-indulgent consumerism that it's going to lead to just emptiness. You may have seen the studies that have been around for a little while, but they show that even though our people today are more connected, so to speak, through social media, they are more lonely than ever. And that is because of an unhealthy indulgence in social networking into this network society. And the church needs to be a voice that can speak intelligently, with compassion, into this experience that people are having, in order to drive them into healthy practices, in order to draw them into healthy lifestyles around their digital connections. That's network theology. So now that we've taken some time to think about like what's going on, where the world is, the need that we have in order to think about online ministry beyond just providing a video service, I want to talk about good practices for online ministry. So we're going to get a little more practical at this point and get into what we can actually do, right? So I want to start off by just making sure that we understand that there's no copy and paste solution to this. It doesn't work to just look at what one church does and say, okay, I'm going to do that, because all of our contexts are different. All of our people are different. They all connect online in different ways, in different capacities. They have different personalities, our churches. There's just a lot of different things. So don't try to copy and paste, but there are good practices. There are good principles that we can look at. So the first thing is live streaming, live worship services. And like I said, it's important not to stop here, but this is easily the first and most important thing that I think any church can do in order to get going in this idea of having healthy online ministry. So live streaming a live worship service is a very different animal than just providing an online service. Many of you have been recording services in like your living room. You've been piecing pieces together as people will send in like an announcement. Somebody will do some worship. You put it together and then you stream it for a group. Some of you have been doing live online services, but you've been doing it in a way that's very different than when you are in the middle of a live worship service. It's a lot more complicated, but it is very important. And the principles, the things that you did to present an online service, some are transferable, but probably actually a lot of them don't translate very well to what you're going to do if you're going to translate to doing a live streaming, live worship service. So some of the things that you need to ask yourself if you're going to get to before you start streaming a live worship service is this: who is available to help? So is it going to be, do you have a staff? Do you have some people that you can assign? Okay, you're the camera person, you're the sound person, or that kind of stuff. Or is it just you? Is it going to be maybe your 10-year-old daughter and you and them, they're going to make this happen? That's important to know. And what is your budget? Because all of this is equipment. There's equipment that's involved, and that's going to be going to cost money. Although there are options that are free, which I'll share with you in just a second. And the biggest question is how you enhance worship, connection, evangelism, mission, and discipleship through your live stream worship service. I'm going to talk technically really quick here about like the different levels of video and audio quality, but then I want to move into how do we move beyond that to actual connection and engagement. So the first thing that you want to ask yourself above all these things is how can you enhance what you already do? So some of you might say, we don't do anything. We have yet to live stream a live worship service, and that's okay. Because you can take a really quick and easy step to enhance that. And so here we go. I have 4 levels of live streaming. And the first one is the easiest and cheapest. And that is to use a cell phone on Facebook. I sincerely believe that it's better to do something, even if it's simple, than to do nothing at all in the online space. And so if you anticipate live streaming a live service, you might say, we don't have any budget, and I don't have anybody besides maybe that person that comes, the one person that comes early on every Sunday morning. Then what I'd recommend you do is you hand them your phone, set up Facebook Live on it, which is not very difficult. There's information about how to do that a little bit on that document that I shared with you. And simply have somebody sit on the front pew holding that phone and live streaming the service. That will cost you almost nothing, and it will be a great start. It'll be a good dip your toe into the water, which is better, I believe, than nothing. But if you do have a little bit of budget, you can take a huge step in the quality of your audio and video by spending about $100 for a tripod and a mount that you stick the phone in, and an external microphone that you plug into your phone. Then suddenly your video and audio production takes a giant leap. And how to do that, there's links in the resources for how to make those simple steps, and even recommendations of what products to use. The third step is a big one, and this one will cost up to like $1,000. But this is where you get a dedicated digital camera. You use your sound mixer, you use an encoder, and you use software, and you can go to then use a higher quality streaming platform such as YouTube. That'll cost about $1,000 to be able to get that higher quality level. That's where most churches are when they get into the live streaming for the first step. They get into this stage where they have a good camera with good microphones, good sound, and they have a dedicated person that's on top of that, taking care of making sure the video is working like they want it to. And then the highest step is we're using multiple cameras, expensive lighting on a professional platform. YouTube and Facebook Live are really good platforms. They're free, which makes them really appealing. There's a whole bunch of platforms that offer a lot more functionality, but they have a cost to them. And I have a link to like reviews of 7 of the best of those in the resources section. So those 4 levels are, pretty broad. There's lots of sub-levels, and there's different things you could do within those to try to enhance what you're doing. The thing is, to go back to what I said before, is I would encourage you to just look at what you're doing now, or what you think you might be able to do, and think about taking a step to enhance it, and try it and give it your best shot. And if it doesn't work, then try it again. do it a little different. And this is a learning process. One of the things I said at the very beginning is that we're going to have to embrace the value of experimentation and risk during this season. And it's okay to go into your first live stream service and not have it all figured out. You'll have the opportunity to evaluate and go back and say, okay, let's make a little few changes. We can make it a little bit better by doing this one thing. Now, on these technical things, like I said, there's a list of resources and stuff that are going to be at the end of this presentation and in the document that I shared. And I would be more than happy to come along side and help talk you through what that could look like with those things. From the very beginning, how do you set up Facebook on your phone so that you can simply stream it, to figuring out what kind of equipment you can get, and even all the way up to setting up lighting and mixing software and all the important things that you would need to really take it to the next level. Now,
Eric,
yeah.
Can I interrupt? Do you want to take a technical question?
Sure, I'd be happy to, yeah.
One question listed is, well, how do you do multiple cameras live? Does that not need post-production?
It doesn't. So somebody already, I see, made a comment in the chat. Yeah, that there's software platforms that you can use. So there's a lot of different ways to go about it. There's inexpensive to free software platforms that you can use in order to switch live video, incorporate slides, and all those kind of things into your presentation. There's also platforms that you can just pay a fee and they make it super, super easy, and it's all done as well. So there's a lot of different ways to go about that. And I'd encourage you to check out the links. There's information specifically about those things there. So OBS software was mentioned in the chat, and that's super powerful free software approach way you can go at it. And if somebody would like to explore more questions like how would you do that, I'd be more than happy to help them figure that out. I have a little bit of experience with them.
Yes, and you can also reach out to the conference for, if your budget, if you're having a hard time with, especially a smaller church and, wondering how to budget this, reach out to us. We're working on maybe making some grant funds available. So please let us know.
Yeah, good. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to move past this technical part of the video and audio for live streaming, but with the word that hopefully this isn't the end of the conversation, with the resources that are provided and the offer to talk with me. And I can see people in the chat that are offering as well that they would be glad to talk to you. That you have people that you can go to say, I need a little more help. And by all means, I'd be glad to do it. But do look at the resources that I provided. A couple of them, there's a section that's getting started with live streaming, and some of those websites walk you through just very carefully every single step that you would need. They provide videos for it as well, and it should be very easy to follow. But if you need help, just ask for help. Because what I want to encourage you to do, first, by all means, get your live service up live streaming when you come back to meeting. That's going to be your first step, and it's going to be very important. But it's also going to be important to enhance your ministry through online connections. And so I have a couple of items to go through that are going to be ideas, some a little more thoughtful and a little just very practical about how you can go, you can enhance your online ministry, how you can take it from simply what one person said that they feel like live streaming is like speaking from the balcony into an empty room, to actually connecting with people, actually accomplishing ministry, actually accomplishing the goals and the mission of your church through online ministry. So one way to look at that is through these kind of 3 stages that Heidi Campbell identified when she wrote the book, The Distant Church. And this is a book that you can get for free. And the links are on there. And she basically just, when the pandemic started, when we got into our time of quarantine, she was observing what was happening with the different churches she knew with her friends and stuff like that. And she noticed there were 3 different stages that churches were going through. So the first one was transfer. So churches were simply identifying, okay, we can't meet. And so they asked themselves the question, how do we put our services onto an online platform? So basically the first step is to take what we've been doing and put it online. And that is a great first step. But there's very little interactivity. There's very little connection that happens through that. It tends to be a very passive event or experience for the viewer. And so she noticed that then churches would start to move beyond that, and they would then start to translate their services. And so they would overcome online boundaries. Whereas the first stage was maybe a model might be like televangelism, where you just turn on your TV and somebody talks to you. The translates was maybe more like a modern talk show where that's a little more casual, where the people are adapting and relating. They might try out Zoom as a platform because of its interactivity. They've asked themselves the questions like, what is core to our worship services? And then how do we translate that into online in a way that's going to be most effective? And then the last stage that she identifies is transform. And this is where people are starting to rethink what church is as it relates to the digital platform. Ask questions like, maybe church shouldn't be so event-oriented. They start to rethink and reimagine what worship and community look like and they could mean in a digital environment. And this is being written today. This is the model that churches are discovering right now. They're innovating, they are taking risks, they're experimenting. A lot of these aren't working, but a lot of them are starting to show some fruit. And this is what's happening right now while we're still in quarantine. And I think that for our online ministry to really be fruitful, when we do get into a time where we're both meeting and having online, we're going to have to really think about how do we not just transfer our service to the web, not just translate it, but how do we actually transform what we're doing in such a way that it'll have a deep impact on people's lives. I watched a webinar last week with these guys, Ted Vaughn and Mingo Palacios, I guess that's how you name. It was part of the Thrive conference. It was really good. And they put this thing together called Best Practices for Enhancing Ministry Through Online Connections. Whew. Preparing for a new webinar, a new Arab church webinar. Okay. And I took their like hour-and-a-half long webinar and I've compiled it, compressed it into a few key points, I think. So the first real important one is iteration. And iteration means this: you try something, you fail at it, or maybe you don't fail, but it doesn't go 100%, but you then evaluate and adjust, and then you try again. That is iteration. And it's an approach towards solving a problem that takes many, many steps, as opposed to saying we're going to solve the whole problem and then fix it all at once. It is a process that takes a lot of patience, but also openness to failure and experimentation. So if you want to value iteration, you need to champion innovation, you need to embrace risk, and you need to fail regularly. You need to avoid having the mindset of we are done. As we go into the next year, as we continue to transition through different stages of quarantine, and we start to implement live streaming, live services, you need to understand that you're not going to be able to come to a place where, okay, we're done, we figured it out. It's going to be a process of trying something and then evaluating, making adjustments, and then trying again and doing that regularly. The next one is connection. And so we want to figure out how are our services going, how is our online ministry going to help people to be connected to each other and to the church. And might need to go beyond Zoom. And Zoom is kind of in the default go-to. Okay, if we want to do a connected service, we do it through Zoom so people can talk to each other. And that's great. That's a good start. But we need to figure out even how to go beyond that. And it might even mean going beyond just the Sunday morning focus of church ministry. And I'll talk about that a little bit later when I get to some really practical recommendations. A third thing that they highly emphasize is empowerment, and that is to decentralize ministry. Empower the leadership in your church in their decision making. Give away the ability to speak for your church. Give away the keys to everything. And I would say this, I've seen a lot of online ministry taking place right now that is almost entirely the pastor or the pastoral staff making it happen. They're the ones that are on screen. And it's not surprising to me that we're all exhausted right now, because it takes so much work to do all of that. And we need, as we move into this new phase of networked society, and how do we approach that through our online ministry, to empower others to be able to do this ministry well, to do it for us. So consider, how do I develop leaders within my church specifically for online ministry? And then how do I empower them to do it? How do I let people in and allow them to help us through this process, and not expect everything to be perfect all the time? That's going to be a really big, scary, but important value as we move forward. And the last one is integration. And these guys made the comment that there can't be any silos. So by that, what they mean is we need to think about digital ministry, our digital ministry being integrated with everything we do with the church. So it's not just a tack on, not just something we do so that people that maybe are out of town or they couldn't come on Sunday morning can be able to watch the service. Those are great things, but it needs to be more than that. And so thinking about how does what we do online connect with what we're doing in person, and how do both of those connect with what we're doing throughout the week, so there's no silos. One of the things that they mentioned as well is to think about how your online ministry can reach your physical community, like your region, the area around your church, the people that could be making their way to church but aren't for whatever reason. How could your ministry actually serve your online ministry, serve your community in some way, and reach those very people that you want to come into the building but aren't? So when we decentralize ministry to people, and then we have to be willing to let go of some of the control, and that's what's really difficult. And Ted and Mingo really emphasize the idea that influence is a better way to lead than through authority. And so integration is going to be a challenge as we figure out how to take the people and the ministries, the leaders in our church, and give them the empowerment back to the other one, in order to move into this online space, even though there's a lot of questions and we don't have all the answers right off the top of our head. Okay, I have put together some very practical ideas. So this will be the last kind of section before I share just the resources. Then we'll have a time of question and answers and sharing of resources for yourself. And this is, as I was thinking about this, and I was telling my wife, we're going to talk about this. She's like, "You've got to give really practical ideas." And I was like, "Oh yeah, it's true." So I've been thinking about this. I keep coming up with new ones. And here's just some ideas. Okay, so a practical idea that you can do as a way to enhance your online ministry with your live in-person ministry is digital bulletins. So what if you produce the bulletin you normally hand out in person, which you might have to do anyway because of social distancing rules. What if you produced it digitally instead of on paper? And then on Sunday morning, along with your announcement that your digital service is going to go live, you include your digital bulletin. And then the people that are at home could follow along on their phones while they're watching the service, as well as the people in your service. They may very well want to pull their phone out and follow along there, as opposed to having a piece of paper in their hands. Simple idea. What if you were to welcome and reference the live stream? So imagine that we have moved into a phase where you have a live in-person service happening, and you're live streaming. You have somebody with a phone or a camera you have set up, and you're live streaming it to the world. During your service, maybe during the welcome time or during your message as you preach, You could look at the camera and say, for everybody that's out there in the world, we welcome you. We're glad that you're here. I I work out most mornings using like a videotape. It's not a videotape, it's online, but anyway, I use a video. And it's funny because the people on the video always talk to me at home, right? They're like, okay, you at home, work harder and stuff like that. And part of me is like, this was recorded like 4 years ago. Who, you know, they're not really talking to me. But another part of me is like, oh, I'm so glad that he talked to me because it's motivating me to actually work. So anyway, it actually means, imagine what it's like if during a live service, you actually talk to the people at home as well as the people that are there. What that does is it bridges the fact that there are people in your building and there are people at home and you're all experiencing something together. So a simple idea. What if you were to do interviews during greeting time? So some churches don't do this. I remember back at First Covenant, I worked there, we would have lots of lively discussions about the value of greeting time. But if you do have greeting time where you say, everyone stand up and say hi to each other, what if you were to invite people to come to the camera and say hello to the people at home? Or if you have, if you are doing it with a cell phone, one of the advantages actually of using a cell phone is it kind of makes it can make the service feel a little bit more real time because you can move it around the room. What if you move the cell phone around the room and ask people to say hi? That's just a simple idea that could help bridge that connection. The opposite of that is what if you were to bring someone from home into the service? So a friend of mine is a youth pastor in Colorado, and he was sharing with me about what he does with their youth ministry. And right now, during quarantine, they live stream their youth group service. And so he sits on the stage of their youth room, and they do things, they stream it to YouTube. But they do things during that service to bring students into what they're doing. So he has a TV behind him that's running Zoom. And so if they want to interview a student, then they bring them into their live stream through the TV using Zoom, and they'll ask them live questions and interaction. And they've even gone to the point where they played a game, they did it digitally, and and we'd have a winner, and then they would be able to live right on the spot, bring that winner in to the meeting through the TV that's on camera in order to say, congratulations, tell us about yourself and stuff like that. But what if you were to, I'm just like thinking out loud, what if you were to go to one of the elderly people in your church that can't make it to the service because of whatever reason they're unable to come to the live service, and have that person pray over your congregation? Or have children whose parents are saying, you know, we don't feel safe coming to church yet. What if you had some of them read the scripture, but do it live on the big screen, or like by my friend's example, have a television on stage that you have them come in through Zoom? It's an idea. Another idea I have is connect the service with a weekly project. This is something I read about that somebody did, and it seems like it could be really powerful. So through their online channels, through email, through social media, the pastor of the church said, this is what we're going to be talking about this Sunday. And she had an illustration about having a cross written on your hand. And so she asked everybody to go through she had kind of like a little exercise that they would do. And at the end, they would take red paint and they would paint a cross on their hand. And then she had them send her pictures of their hands. When it then came time for her to do their Sunday service that Sunday, as she talked about this in her sermon, she then showed those pictures during the sermon. And so what she was doing was connecting what was happening during that service with what people were doing at home and online through this project. I thought it was a pretty good idea. Another one is live polls via an online app. So there are lots of apps you can use. You could look at where maybe during your service, you ask a question. I don't know what it might be, but then you have people both in the service and at home pull their phones out and they can answer the question through the online app. And then you're able to share the results and use that as a discussion point. That would be a way that people that are in the service and at home are able to engage on the same level. And the last thing is to maybe manage chat with a platform. The little picture that's on this slide is from the Page Church Online Platform, which is a powerful platform you can use to, it's free, to manage your video streaming and have chat, and there's even has a cool little feature where it can do prayer requests and people pop out and then somebody can pray for them. It's kind of neat. It's in the resources. And that's what I want to go over really quick is some resources. So I want to go through these really quickly because they're in the document and they'll give us time to chat. So, but I'll just highlight them. So there's a webinar, the one where I first heard of Heidi Campbell, on that's listed here. Through that link, you can get all the information about her and how to find her book. If you have trouble with it, just contact me. I'll be glad to share it with you. Another webinar, this is the one that I shared that Ted and Mingo shared about preparing for a new era of church. There's a link to that. Some websites, here are some getting started with live streaming. This first one, 6 Tips, is a really good like overview of live streaming, live services that I would recommend everybody. It's like a first stop, definitely check out that one. And then the next one is, it's almost like taking a step back. It's super simple. This is the one that I said, like, walks you through the very basics with videos and all kinds of stuff about how to start live streaming with like just a camera. Next is more advanced. So if you are already live streaming and you want to know how to take it to the next level, that's what these websites are for. Sweetwater is a company that actually contracts and they help churches like put together equipment and stuff like that, but they have a really good guide on how to take it to the next level. And then this 7 best live streaming services for your church is a website by DAcast or DACast, I'm not sure how you say that. They provide a platform, but they also review the others. And so it's a really useful website. If you want to go beyond the limitations of Facebook and YouTube and check out some of the other streaming platforms, that'll be a helpful website for you to check out. And then some additional resources for you. Streaming worship services and copyrights in a time of social distancing. This is a really important thing to consider because if you're doing music or something, there are copyright issues and you want to consider those. And so I'd definitely encourage you to check that out. And then lastly is a link to that church online platform that I mentioned earlier, which is the software that you can use to manage chat. It sets up a unique URL where you tell your church to go to, my church, and then .com or whatever it is. And then it has that unique prayer request feature. And that is the end. That's what I had to prepare for today. And so what I'd love to do is give us the opportunity to share, ask questions, but then also if you have resources that come to mind that you like to share, then I'd encourage you to do so as well, because one of the best things about ministry is the opportunity that we have to borrow ideas from each other, and which is great. So that's it. Dawn, you want to help me manage some questions, answers, and answers?
Thank you so much, Eric. So Lisa Ellis from Bethany had a question about, can you share more about ways churches can provide, or rather launch, tiers of cohort formation classes to equip congregants? So Lisa, you're welcome to unmute yourself to clarify, but I think you're asking about how to do spiritual formation type classes.
Yeah, if there's some different levels, suggestions to get more engagement, especially, larger churches or smaller churches, right? I think children's ministry and youth are doing that, but as far as, the next step to try to engage, things that are meaningful right now, just maybe it's personal care things, spiritual care, or new people wanting to learn more about the Bible, right?
Yeah. And so you're speaking specifically about like online.
Yeah.
And right now during quarantine, right? Yeah. So the simple, I think there's a kind of a little bit of simple and a little bit of a complex to the answer. And I would love to hear what other people have to say too. But I think the simple side, ironically, the easiest part would be to be able to set up those classes, because you can use Zoom. Zoom is a super useful platform for doing small groups, or there are other ones as well. Dawn recently came across one called what's the one you've been using, Dawn? Circles. Circles, yeah, which is a little bit more collaborative and gives people the opportunity to engage with each other in some unique ways. Anyway, those platforms and those things aren't very difficult to use. the harder part is how to get people to engage with them.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is where it's going to be important for you and your church to strategize. How do we engage people well beyond just talking to them through a video? And so whether it's through your communications, through emails or social media or instant messaging, or through even your announcements during your videos, to be able to clearly articulate, these are the things that we'd like to offer. Here's how you sign up for it, and start making that plan. And I think that's actually the more challenging part right now. And not in small part, because people today are kind of getting more and more used to just passively watching. And when you say, hey, we have this thing coming up, they kind of go into a mode of thinking it's a commercial, and this is where I stop listening, right? And so to figure out how to engage people beyond that is the more challenging part. And I think you do that through consistency, having a consistent message, and using every platform you have available, email or social or through your video.
Okay. Quick question around bandwidth. Any recommendations regarding minimal or optimal for SD or HD uploading live stream?
Yeah, those are definitely considerations that you need to have that I wouldn't be able to say off the top of my head.
I could probably answer that question for you.
Great, Ray. I'd appreciate it. There's also in those resources, in those websites,
Right.
they talk about it a lot. But if Ray has a quick answer, go ahead.
Yeah, your big concern is not so much download speed, it's upload. If you're streaming, you want to be able to, at a minimum, have 5 megabits per second upload with nothing else going on in the house or the place. So if you've got too many things uploading at the same time, you're going to start seeing freeze frames. But most can do with 10 or higher. As long as you make sure you know how many people are uploading. So if you're multicasting, like with several cameras, uploading to YouTube, uploading to Facebook, you really want to watch how many resources are uploading into the internet. Okay, so 5 at a minimum, 10 would be nice.
Yeah, and along those lines, I mean, this is suddenly getting really technical, and I really appreciate your question, and Ray, the answer is really helpful. But you also want to consider saving some of your bandwidth for yourself. So if you're at your church and you're doing a live service and you have your Wi-Fi, you can go into your router and you can set up like different access points that they have different priority, so that the people in your service don't use up all your bandwidth while they're sitting there and they're downloading apps, whatever they're doing, and then it crashes your internet service. But there are ways that you can go into your router and prevent that from happening, to save the bandwidth that you need. And they'll end up having a slow download of their app, but it'll save you from having your stream get slowed down. So good question.
Here's one right up your alley, Erik. Do you have any success stories of how to engage the youth through digital formats like Zoom? Do you see that? It's the last comment right on the chat. You can read the rest of it.
Well, I do, but I'll say this, that everybody I talk to is struggling right now with youth ministry over Zoom. So even the best are struggling to have students continue to engage. And it's in large part because of Zoom fatigue. It was for better or worse, when the schools said, okay, we're going to do distance learning and we're going to have you start learning through Zoom, then Zoom became school for students, and that changed their attitude towards it, right? And then when the sun came out, they were like, oh, I think I'd rather be outside than sitting in front of my computer. And then parents I hear stories over and over again of parents who are saying, no, you're spending too much time on the computer. And the kids are like, but I want to go to youth group. But they're like, no, you have to go outside. So there's a lot of challenges right now for that. But what I've seen is the most useful and the most helpful are two things. One is highly engaging. And so like using a platform like Zoom or something. Some people that use like YouTube, like my friend that I mentioned, he figures out a way to bring students in to his YouTube stream, but also they pay really close attention to the chat. He has volunteers assigned to interact with students in the YouTube chat. So highly engaging is really important. And the other thing, this is I think a mistake that a lot of youth groups have made is they've thought, well, this is hard, and so we're just going to play games the whole time. And what they've discovered is that students have lots of opportunity to play games online, but they're not having very much opportunity to really challenged and be developed in their faith. And the people that have decided we're actually going to take this seriously and use this opportunity to help engage students in growing in their faith are finding students are more likely to stick with it than if they're just coming on to play a game.
So, Eric, just to go alongside with that, I know those of you who don't know me, my name's Greg. I'm from Milwaukee Covenant Church in Portland area. Our youth and family services pastor has done some Zoom things, and how she's organized it is, one, just talks to the kids. We don't have a really strong older youth group, but we have a pretty decent sized group of, first through like third and fourth grade. So she just engaged them on, how are you guys doing? What have you been doing during this time? She did like a Zoom scavenger hunt, like go find a red pencil in your house and run it back here, show and tell, different things that they've done, different things. And then she read them a little Bible story. It was really, it was 45 minutes maybe at most. But that seems to be something that has worked well, at least in our population. So I don't think it has to be, the best and brightest, big showy thing ever. Is just as much as to show that you care and you want to reach out to them. But the Zoom fatigue for sure. My kids have been, my kids are younger, they're 9 and 7, but they're like, oh, another school meeting on Zoom, or, oh, I don't want to talk to my grandparents because they're just on Zoom, that's happening. So whatever you can do just to get it to not feel like Zoom. And Christy, I'm sure some of you know her, Christy Smith, she has done a great job of making sure the Zoom doesn't feel like Zoom. It feels like you're in the room. And it takes a lot of work and time to do, but it has worked.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I would add.
We've hit 2:00, so actually we are at the end of our hour, and we're pretty committed to making sure we honor people's time and that. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Erik, for all the work and putting that together. Please know that the PacNWC.org website has all of our contact information. It has the sites and resources that Erik has been referring to. You are welcome to reach out, and as there is need, we can do this again. So please let us know if there's more questions or topics that would be really helpful for us to hit, and we will gather our resources to help you out with that. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for taking the time today. It's great to see so many of you take part, and we pray for you. Bless you all. Goodbye.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you to everyone for coming. It was a lot of fun.